affordable housing. Before we start, we would like to talk a little bit about our safety department. Home Forward created the Integrated Facility Services and Safety Department in 2016, initially to evaluate staff safety, policies and training, safety committee, online incident report and incident investigation, and the incident loss prevention program. We've also created the property safety inspections and the emergency management plan. We had the opportunity to discuss some about this yesterday in our conference. But as we were working on OSHA and employee safety, RADON started coming to the conversation. And through the safety committee and staff inquiries, RADON concerns were brought up as we start seeing the first RADON tests coming after we were turning our properties through RAD, and testing and mitigation was part of the investors' requests. We started receiving the RADON testing and results, and we didn't know what to do with those from the safety perspective. And we started creating some policy to protect our staff and residents. Radon is a naturally occurring radioactive gas that is invisible, it's odorless, it's tasteless. It comes from radioactive decay of radium, and it's an element found in most rocks and soils. Radon can enter a building from the ground up, and it can concentrate to tens or even hundreds of times to the level of from the outdoor air. Radon is the second cause of lung cancer. Radon is everywhere. We found in places where even the map said radon was not potentially present, and we found high levels of radon. And when we saw in our internal map for Oregon, when that area was in red, where it was supposed to have high levels of radon, we didn't find high levels of radon. So this map is only showing us that it's practically in all America, and the only way of knowing if there is radon in a property is by testing. This is how radon enters a home, and it's the same process to enter a building. It is invisible to the naked eye, and this radioactive gas can enter through the windows, through the cracks in the foundation, through the sump drainage to cracks, and the ground, through the water that it comes from the ground, the soil, the pipes, and it can come through many places in the buildings. It will mainly be in the ground level. This is the ground level for this building we are evaluating. But some, depending on the foundation of the buildings, ground levels could be the first floor, according with the different of the buildings. We breathe radon into our lungs, and it usually will pass out without harm. The threat could be when it lodged in the lungs, and when the lungs is vulnerable. If you smoke or have any other respiratory problems, it might stay in the lungs for more time, and it could create some damage and create lung cancer in the long term. And something very critical about radon is what causes cancer is the long-term exposure. And there is no mathematical equation about what long-term is. We just know that what long-term is. It's just the term used to evaluate the health effects of radon. There is many ways of testing, and we have decided to test through professionals, people that is certified, and they will let you know what type of testing they need to do in the buildings. There's many different ways of doing it. There is short-term kits, and there is long-term kits. There is, you could do like a 3-day kit or a 7-day kit. It depends on what the kit is they're using. By this way, we will be able to determine if the levels of radon in the housing. Long-term readings could be for those that some of the issues we have with some of our residents is that they tamper with the equipment, or they're opening the windows or the doors too often. So this might jeopardize the testing. So in those units, we do long-term readings, and it may take several weeks to be able to create the data. The World Health Organization recommends an action level of 2.7, and the EPA recommends an action level of 4.0. So if you find radon testing 4.0 or above, it is recommended that you mitigate. And we're going to talk about different ways of mitigation. The EPA considers the following reduction strategies only as temporary mitigation or short-term or partial measures. You can seal cracks, change the house pressurization, natural ventilation, or a heat recovery ventilator. The clue or the main ingredient for reducing levels of radon is the air circulation. So there's ways of doing that, just allowing the air to go through, but sometimes, especially when it's the winter and it's cold, that is very difficult to do. So you could do the long-term mitigation, and there are several methods to mitigate buildings with high levels of radon. The only goal for this mitigation system is to reduce or eliminate the radon gas exposure inside a home. And every situation is different, the buildings are different, and it depends on, we will look at some pictures in a minute, but how the system will be installed. The best way of knowing how to do it correctly is by a professional and hire a certified technician that will recommend the best approach. New construction should have radon resistant features, and those fans could be installed from the beginning of the construction in the basement, crawl spaces, to help the radon to pass through, so it doesn't have to stay in the building. And that is not that expensive. We found some of the systems from $600 to, it's in average $2,500, but we've had some for $5,000. But this will mitigate the radon for the whole building. And this is just a couple of examples to show how the fans could be installed to be able to concentrate the air in an area and then exhaust it out of the building so it doesn't access to the building. When we were doing all of this work, we were researching and found that we didn't find any other housing agency having policies or procedures or guidance about radon. And we looked for ANSI that has some regulations and some guidance to be able to start our policy and guidance. We didn't find any federal or enforceable regulation controls that will help us with information about radon levels. There was only guidelines with recommendations for the EPA and the WHO. But there was not much information for us to use in multifamily housing. There was some for schools, but not for multifamily housing. In 1970, OSHA created the General Duty Clause, and it means that each employer shall furnish to each of its employees employment and a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious harm to its employees. With this General Duty Clause, we are required as agencies or employers to give some guidance to our employees about the safety for radon. But in 2011, the EPA in collaboration with HUD, released a federal action plan for radon. And in 2013, HUD issued a notice with information about the dangers of radon, but as of today, HUD has not given us comprehensive requirements or provided no specific funding to pay for radon testing or mitigation in our housing at all. So with this information, we were just starting from the bottom up, trying to build a policy and procedures for our staff and our development and our housing to be able to provide safe housing for our residents. Our policy for Home Forward, it is our policy to test and retest for radon in all the properties that we own. If a certified radon professional finds levels that are above the recommended levels of the EPA, that is 4.0 picocuries per liter, a mitigation plan must be developed to ensure that the mitigation is completed within 12 months by a radon professional until the level of radon are below 4.0. Radon resistant construction is required for all new construction of our properties. We will provide tenants and staff at Home Forward with information about the health risk of radon and information related to the testing and mitigation of radon in Home Forward buildings. Home Forward aims to complete its efforts to test for and mitigate, if needed, radon in all public housing by the end of 2020 and the rest of the affordable housing portfolio by the end of 2023. Following the completion of the initial phase of testing, we will retest properties according with the ANSI standards and recommendations. And we're going to look at a graph that is going to explain that to us better. It could be 2 years if we've had some mitigation done. And this is to make sure that the mitigation system is working. And if not, we will retest every 5 years. And the reason that we do that is because the soil is moving and it could, especially after an earthquake, for sure, we need to come back and test. But we need to make sure, and ANSI recommends about 2 to 5 years to make sure that the radon levels are still safe. This is the graph of testing. We will test 100% of the ground level spaces. And this could be, as we saw in the other picture, this could be a basement. It could be the office and common areas in a high rise, but it could also be units if they are in the ground floor. And we will test 10% of your units above. And in high rises where we have 14 floors, we still do 10% until the last floor, just to make sure that radon is not traveling through pipes or to building materials as well. I hope that you can see this graph is very complex, but this will give us some information of how we are testing and notifying our residents. When we test a property, we will receive test results, and it could be below 4.0, above 4.0, or void or inconclusive. And we found this void and inconclusive, as I was saying before, people tampering with the equipment and opening windows, or the test is not conclusive or is void. And we will look at, if it's inconclusive, we will look at other units in the building. And if they are below 4.0, we will come back to this unit to make sure that we have testing. But if we have other units above 4.0, we will mitigate the units according with a 4.0 or more testing. And we will retest until we get a result for those units. If it's below 4.0, we have two different, we're doing two different things. Below 2.9, we will come back and retest every 5 years. But 3 to 3.9, we will come back and retest every 2 years. And the reason why is if we have a unit that is 3.7, 3.5, it's very close to 4, is high, but it's not in the action level. We didn't want to wait 5 years to make sure that that unit is still below 4.0. So we wanted to come back sooner than that, and we made the decision to come back in 2 years. If the unit is above 4.0, we will come to the unit and mitigate. And the mitigation, as I said, it depends on the building and how many units are affected, and if it's a basement or a crawl space. As soon as we complete mitigation, we will retest to make sure that the system is working. And we found in a couple of properties that the radon levels were reduced, but were still above 4.0. So we will come back and do this circle as many times as we need to make sure that we are not leaving until the test levels are below 4.0. And when we achieve that, we will come back 2 years later to make sure that this works. And I wanted to pause here because this is a complex chart. I wanted to see if any of you have any questions about this so far. You can write your questions in the chat. Or if you would like to use the raise your hand, we can also do that. I'm gonna make a package available with all our policies and procedures so you can have all of this information. It is just, it could be complex, and just wanted to make sure that we are all in the same page about this. As we do this work, one of the things that we found, and it's actually was one of the issues we had, was communication with the residents. Sometimes it took longer than expected communicating with the residents, and it could be because the staff that received the testing, it was no longer on the property, was transferred or quit and went somewhere else, or there was some issues we had with notification in places where it took us too long to notify the residents. So we really made our efforts on improving the notification system to let the residents know and put timelines for residents to be informed about the radon levels in their units. And the same thing with staff, that we have a flow chart for staff and for residents to make sure that we are letting people know. And these are charts that we use letting us know if we have to notify staff or if not. And we actually have drafts of the notification systems or just a draft email or a draft letters. So we make it easier for property management for them to pass the information, letting the staff that it's coming to the buildings know that yes, this building is right now, we found levels of, for example, 7.0, and we are working on remediation, or mitigation, but we will put signs in the, for example, in the office, if the office tested above 4.0, or in the laundry room. We will put the signs, and we will not remove those signs until mitigation has been completed, and if we find levels below 4.0. And we also send emails to our staff, and this is a chart for staff, but I just want to making sure that we are working with the staff and don't forgetting that we have to notify them. And for residents, we have a more complex chart. There's a lot of notification that happens with our residents. We send them a pre-testing notification. Your property has been selected for testing. Then your unit has been selected for testing. That's another notice. And if we find below 4.0, we send a notice saying all units were below 4.0, and here is the information, or the information will be available in the office if you need to look at it. But if it's above 4.0, we will give them the table with everybody's testing results. And then we will send them a notice to be able to access the unit, and a notice when we test and find the levels, whatever testing came. But we will stop the notification when the levels of radon in the unit is below 4.0. And this is actually very complex, and this is where we had issues in the past, was for some of the system to break, and we lose communication with staff and our residents. The lessons learned, notification and communication is very important for staff and residents. Even when a plan or policy is not in place, communication is important. And we need to let staff know that radon is present if we have the testing. And some of you or some of us that is going through RAD, that is going through tax credit properties, you might have those test results in our archives, or somewhere. Maybe somebody needs to be notified about those results. Internal coordination among departments, it required clear policies and procedures given various moving parts. We had several meetings with many departments, so the safety department was facilitating these conversations, but we needed to talk to development about the work that they were doing, to property management about notices for the residents, how this was going to affect staff, how this is affecting maintenance and other people in the building. Talking about resident services when somebody's tampering with equipment and things like that. It needs coordination with many departments. The resident services is one of them. rent assistance, when we have to modify the utility allowance, if we have to tamper with the people's utilities to be able to install the fans. So there is a lot of coordination and a lot of work to do with this, and it was we were able to gather all of this information because of the work and because of the great people that we have working for Home Forward. That it took many meetings and many work to be able to achieve the policies and procedure. Given the lack of dedicated funding for this effort, it is important to ensure adequate reserves and a long-term plan for testing and mitigation. And as we mentioned before, we don't have funding from HUD that is helping us specifically for RADON. So we have to use some of our research to be able to do this work. And we needed to make sure that we were going to fund research to continue the work, because after mitigation, we have to continue the testing for these buildings. Resident meetings was very, very important when you sent them notices about radon, and radon it was high in your unit. People had questions. So what is radon? What about me? What is my reading? It was really nice to be able to talk to residents. We did in-person meetings in the past for some of the properties. And after COVID, we learned that Zoom and Skype was also a good tool to answer resident questions. We've had readings very low, but we had readings in a couple of properties over 100, which are really, really high, that we needed to make immediate action to be able to reduce the radon levels in our property. So talking to the residents and explaining what it is, explaining that they will, in the meantime, that they have to open their windows. So we created also flyers for our residents to tell them what to do, things and ways that they could do to reduce the radon levels. Do we have any questions so far? I'm going to pull up the policies and procedure document I was talking at the beginning, but before I go there, I wanted to ask you if any of you may have questions. You can write them in the chat, or you can unmute yourselves and talk, or raise your hand with Skype option. Just 1 second. Thank you, Chris, for your note. And this is the radon package that we will make available for your review. This is the policy and procedures. We decided to do 2 different documents. One policy, some of the things that we also learned is that we were making changes as we were learning. And we decided to do a policy saying that, yes, if we find radon, we're going to do something about it, and having procedures that those could be changed as we found changes in the system. And one of those changes, for example, was first the notices. We were just being more strict about the notices, and also making changes for inconclusive testing. We didn't know at the beginning that we were going to have inconclusive or void testing. So this way we were able to do more changes. So the policy is going to give us the information of why this is important and who is this policy applying, the hazards and risk of radon, and testing and retesting. And this is something that we discussed. And who are you going to follow? Are you going to follow the WHO recommendation? Or are you going to follow the EPA recommendation? So those are 2 different ones that we decided to follow the EPA. Question that we had in the chat is radon more likely to be present in new construction than old construction? It doesn't matter. New construction could, depending on where you are located, may have radon fans already installed. In Portland, we have some of those codes that might be requiring in some areas, but it might not. So if it's not a requirement by the city and the codes, it does not matter if it's an old or new construction. The only way of knowing is by testing. And the testing, it could be from $70 to $150 per unit. It is not expensive, and depending on the layout of your building. I mean, we had a 250 unit building, and we only tested the 10% of the second to the 14th floor, and then all the areas in the basement, and it is not that expensive, but when you have so many units, it could become very expensive. The next question is, how can you tell that it's there? Is there symptoms for the residents? Actually, there is no testing or no symptoms that our residents could have because it's odorless, you cannot taste it. And the symptoms, when they appeared, it might be too late. The person might already have lung cancer. So before the lung cancer is found, there is kind of no in between. So it will affect kids at the same way that it will affect adults, but it will definitely affect more smokers and people that have lung problems. So as you know, a lot of this vulnerable population that we house are smokers. So this will affect them much more higher, much more chances for them to get cancer. So there is no way to know it's present if we don't test. And this is actually a good recommendation for your home. If there is chances that you don't have a radon resistant construction and that you start testing. When we did the training with our staff and we were so concerned about the buildings, staff start getting concerned about their homes, and we have found a couple of our staff testing their home and finding high levels of radon in their personal home. So this is a good practice to have, and I tested my home. Unfortunately, it's below 1, but just know that radon is in the park, it's everywhere. It's just the concentration and the levels. And again, the only way of knowing is by testing. Feel free to keep asking questions, and I will keep going through our policy and procedures. So here is where we are deciding that we are going to follow ANSI and the EPA recommendation, and that we are going to mitigate, and that we are going to do radon resistant construction. We are being very specific that we will only use radon professionals. There is tests that you can buy at Home Depot that you can it's a little bottle that you can remove the lid, leave it in the unit or in your house for 3 days and take it to a lab for results. That is good. People can do that, but we didn't want to accept those testings because it will be very difficult for us to manage. We have over 7,000 units, and it will be very difficult to manage individual testing. So for radon, we decided that we will do it through a radon professional, and we will mitigate as we go through the buildings. We talk about utility allowance. We will review utility allowances if we are affecting the residents' utilities. And notification, we put it in writing, and these were some of the things that we changed. We need to let people know within 30 business days. And we make this, it might sound like a long time, but sometimes there's holidays, there's a Thanksgiving week, and we found that sometimes it will take a little bit longer. Ideally, and how we have trained our staff is that we are going to send the notices as soon as we receive them, but usually there's many things happening that we wanted to limit to 30 business days. And this is the information that what we're going to do if a unit is below 4.0, above 4.0, or inconclusive, and this is what we discussed in the chart. We also, very important is that all the test and mitigation reports will be stored. And safety, we are tracking them just to make sure that we are not missing a unit with high levels of radon, and that we know which ones are 3.8 to make sure that we are going to test them in 2 years, or that we need to test them in 5 years. So we have a really robust tracking model that we are using in Jardy actually to be able to track the levels of radon. We also did a tips for air quality flyer for our residents, so just remind our residents what is a good quality of air, and the air circulation is part of this. We also found that some of those units that were very high, like the one that I told you above 100, we found another one around 40. Those residents were having extreme storage in their units or had some hoarding disabilities and issues in the unit. So when there is no air circulation, the radon levels are usually higher. And this is the procedures manual. And this will go more in deep and in details of the things that we discussed. It will give information, more background about HUD and about the rules that we have available. The department roles, this is our department, and this is, we are facilitating the work, and we are facilitating the policies and procedures, but we are working with many other departments, and we are also giving guidance to the properties managed by third-party management company and their maintenance staff, so they can come and inspect the building, and they can come and make sure that the system is working as well, and that they also send notifications to the residents as applicable. And then we start just talking about the responsibilities for each department. And it will give the information of what my department is going to do. And we are responsible for tracking. We're responsible for keeping us to date with ANSI and keeping us up to date on the policy and the procedures, and project management and giving information to the project management, and etc. We will give information to, this is development and what their responsibilities are while they are doing rehab work or new construction, community services and information and referral system that they will have to do, asset management, the same process, property management, third-party property management, and etc. And we will give more details about the testing procedure. And this is the chart that we looked at that we looked earlier. And it will give us information again about the testing and what to do with the testing. It will talk about the mitigation procedures, notification procedures. That is very, very lengthy. These will also tell us the notifications. What we decided to name the notices, A, B, C, and etc. And we will, when we are sending the notice, we are talking about Gale, we are sending the notice A to the resident, A to the property Humboldt Gardens, for example. They're receiving the notification A. So we can easily come to this document and look and see what specific notification is the one that we have to see. We are letting our new move-ins, if we have tested the property and if they have radon, if their property has radon resistant construction. We also found that there is, that we have some non-residential tenants. These are buildings that we have, or commercial tenants, or we have subcontracted or just leased to other agencies that are doing services. Like shelters or things like this, and it is also our responsibility to let them know about our work and about the presence of radon in their properties. And also what maintenance procedures we have to do. So this is, we will send you the information and a copy of this document. And this is the visual that we also discussed earlier, how it's coming to the building. And some pressurization and some examples and all the charts. There's something here that I wanted to show you. And these are all the examples of the letters as well. So you will see the letters if you have radon on your properties, that you could use those letters as examples. There's many letters. Do you have any additional questions about radon? While you think about your questions, wanted to share with you that last month we got recognized by HUD Secretary of Works. We got an award for our radon work and the safety for our residents. So it was a nationwide recognition, and Home Forward was recognized for the work that we are doing with radon. And we're very happy about that. It was a lot of work. Any additional questions? Thank you, Chris. Any additional questions about radon? Have any of you heard or done radon testing in your properties? Or have you heard about any time 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that somebody was doing radon testing at your properties? Nothing? Well, it might not be that uncertain in the future if you start doing this work. If you start doing HUD might be start requiring some testing in the near future, and hopefully they'll be able to give us some guidance and some funding to do this work. But if for any reason you hear about radon, just know that that is a hazard, and that it can create a lot of health issues for your staff and for your residents. But this is something that needs to take action. But you don't have to start from the beginning or from the bottom as we did. But you are welcome to use any of our policies or procedures or notices to be able to take action with radon on your properties. We will post the presentation and the notification packet if you have any questions. And this is my contact information in case I do have additional questions, and if there's anything I can help you with in the future. Thank you everyone for your participation, and I will be here for a couple more minutes if you have additional questions. Thank you everyone. Stay until the end to get your event app code. We're receiving a message from Nara Service Officer. If you will stay a little bit longer to receive your event app code.